I just want you to know I practiced this word about 20 times to make sure that I did not mispronounce it.
I have a question. Has anyone ever said with all due respect and then not followed up with a zinger?
His side of the bed. If I come in and I'm on the other side, he will move it. Yeah, that's it.
Which side do you like? With all due respect, you make a good point.
Cheery Oreos! Toasted Oreos!
Mute. He's muted.
I love what he's saying. He doesn't need sounds.
You're so small, squishing your head, Joseph.
You can.
Do it with me, Joe.
With all due respect, you really do look handsome, Bruce. Cheery Oreos! Toasted Oreos!
Look at you. You are insane.
How did I do that?
You're
How did I do
insane.
that? You just made the intro reel. Yes, you did. Da 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 da. Da, 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 da. It's Cinco de Mayo, everybody. It's Cinco de Mayo. It is May 5th. It is time for you to grab a cocktail. I am not drinking a margarita, although I will be. I am drinking some beautiful South African Cabernet Sauvignon, and my guest today is the one, the only, Kate O'Neill. She has promised me that she will be drinking a coffee because it is 12 o'clock somewhere. It is 12 o'clock where she is, but it is 6 p.m. where I am, and I am going to be drinking to your health, my friends. I hope you are well. My name is Joseph Jaffe. This is live from Cape Town. Do you like the background, by the way? I did it myself. I mean, kind of. I put the flowers there. That's pretty much all I did. And I just thought it'd be nice, a little bit of a change. I'm moving around the table as we celebrate another day in paradise. And Cape Town is a paradise, except for the fact that the wind is galing right now. It is galing. Cape Town is known for ridiculous winds. Lots of comments coming in. Apparently, my mother is watching. There's one more day for her to make her debut. Is there even a mother? Does she even exist? Was I given up at birth for adoption, raised by a pack of wolves? Nobody knows. I don't know. But if she is around, you will meet her, I hope, tomorrow. Tom Morris is ready for his daily dose of Jaffe Juice. Ritesh Patel is here, and he says, hello, Kate and Joe. And Neil Conlon is here. The one, the only Neil Conlon is here. I am so happy he's here. I've actually been hanging out with Neil. I've gotten to know him a little bit in the Clubhouse. He's a wonderful guy. Stephen Rubin is here. Tom says he missed the windows and drapes yesterday. I am so sorry. And he adds, a Cabernet show is always a good show. Life is a Cabernet. Mr. Tom Morris, who has Jaffe coin, which doesn't rhyme. Adam John says, that is my wine of choice as well. Nothing like a good cab with good friends. And you are my good friend as well. Mr. Jeffrey Wallman is here live from South Africa. Nice to see you. It is wonderful to see all of you guys here. But I know you're not here for me. I know that you're here for Kate O'Neill and also to find out about the Jaffe coin. I get it. Jaffe coin dipped a little bit. It is a buyer's market right now, apparently. I don't know. I'm just saying. It was high yesterday, it's lower today. Who knows what the hell is going on? And Tristan John Griffiths is here. He says, hey, buddy, good to catch you live. Rumor has it that Tristan John Griffiths is mentioned in the seated soliloquy today. So you're just going to have to wait and see. But one thing that I've been telling you about with this idea of the Jaffe economy is that I'm continuing to add to it. I'm continuing to add experiences, access, and assets. The ability for you to become a part of the show, the ability for you to express yourself, the ability for me to promote you. For example, today's show is brought to you. Do you know who today's show is brought to you by? Well, of course, it is Cantera Negra Tequila. I mean, it's Cinco de Mayo. How could it not be brought to you by Cantera Negra Tequila? Taste is its own reward. So this obviously, DC Crenshaw, one of the co-owners of this brand, he was on the show yesterday. Amazing guy. And I figured, let him sponsor the show. But normally, I just gave him $1,000 because it would be $500 to sponsor an episode. And yesterday I kind of gave it to him. So, DC, expect an invoice, my friend, expect an invoice. But enough about that. Let's talk about birthdays. Mr. Jim Stengel, former Chief Marketing Officer of a small consumer packaged goods company called Procter & Gamble. And I want to just say one thing. Mr. Jesse Thomas, it is his birthday today. Jesse Thomas is, for those of you that know him, he's a wonderful guy. He's a creative guy. And what I actually realized today, a little revelation, is that I used to call, and in fact, I still do call his company Jess3, but I actually realize now that it's Jesse. I mean, as Homer Simpson would say, don't. Jess3 is a creative agency that specializes in data visualization. And I cannot tell you more except for the fact that Jesse and I have been visualizing certain things associated with this show. Watch the space. Jesse is currently in South Africa, believe it or not, and he is living the dream. He's actually like living the nomad life, just like Julie Rose. And you should go and just follow him on Instagram and just experience what he's doing. He's running his business, his practice, first from Mexico and now from South Africa. It's just been a joy to watch and follow. But now that he's actually in my homeland, it makes it even more personal and more intimate. So happy birthday, Jesse. And then finally on LinkedIn, Patrick, Michael, Rodrigo, and Henk Kleinhans, happy birthday. Well, it's time to get into our seated soliloquy. And the seated soliloquy today, I said to Kate, I said, it's about you, but it's called Squish. And she was like, huh? I'm not really sure why. But you will find out in about 3 seconds. In prepping for today's show, I was researching quotes for the incredible Kate O'Neill. But these are some of the ones that I didn't use. Technology is best when it brings people together. That is Matt Mullenweg, social media entrepreneur. Here's another one. It has become appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity. And that was by Albert Einstein, scientist. Thanks for letting me know. Here's another one. The web, as I envisioned it, we have not seen it yet. The future is still so much bigger than the past. Tim Berners-Lee, inventor of the World Wide Web. One more. If future generations are to remember us more with gratitude than sorrow, we must achieve more than just the miracles of technology. We must also leave them a glimpse of the world as it was created, not just as it looked when we got through it. President Lyndon B. Johnson. One more. It's not a faith in technology, it's faith in people. Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple. And finally, the advance of technology is based on making it fit in so that you don't really even notice it. So it's part of everyone's and everyday life. And that was Bill Gates, and I took that from his Tinder profile. Come on, everyone's doing it. Give me a break. Look, it's quite clear there's a line drawn in the sand here. That line is the line that divides technology and humanity. And I guess it's up to us whether we insert the word or versus and between the two. The other day I saw a post on Facebook from Tristan John Griffiths that read, "What is your biggest struggle with hashtag social media right now?" My response, just a little bit snarky, was social media. His response as a whole, mine, for the most part, his, we should talk. I actually didn't see that final comment. And if I hadn't written this soliloquy, I wouldn't have posted sure back in return. Like I said earlier, we get to choose if we are passive spectators or active participants when it comes to the evolving role that technology plays in our lives. If we are smart, strategic, empathetic, and humble, we'll find a way to enhance our lives, feed humanity, save our souls, and ultimately make a meaningful difference. If, however, we are, and I hate to say it, human, and therefore, as flawed humans, greedy, selfish, short-sighted and narrow-minded, then we will all go down with the ship. Or to end with one final quote, once a new technology rolls over you, if you're not part of the steamroller, you're part of the road. And that was Stuart Brand. And that's why I called this soliloquy Squish. Well, I know she has a point of view on this, and we're going to hear from her soon enough. We're going to hear from Kate O'Neill. Kate is author of Tech Humanist and 3 other books. She's founder of KO Insights, an advisor on digital transformation and strategy, and a keynote speaker on how data and emerging technologies are shaping the future of human experiences. Among her prior roles, she was one of the first 100 employees at Netflix. I did not know that, and led one of the first digital strategy and analytics agencies. Well, I mean, how about that? But before I bring her on, please watch this.
This is going to change everything. You know, we're all doing a lot of Zoom calls and webinars, and we're all, you know, kind of using virtual meetings and such. What people have been trying to do is sort of cram in the ideas and metaphors from physical space into virtual meetings, and they don't fit necessarily. We're just existing in ways that aren't as clear cut as they once were. We're dealing with uncertainty in our future on many levels. Changes are accelerating. Things are moving fast. Things are more connected than ever. One of those levels has to do with AI and automation. Online and offline aren't as distinct as they used to be. In the moment that we're all living through, a lot of what people have been trying to do is sort of step back from our expectations of how business is done normally, and to think about what we can do with the tools that we have. The opportunity to create these mixed experiences and to bring virtual experiences into the physical world and to blend them and really bring those metaphors and interactions to their fullest.
I want to hire this unflappable virtual presenter. That's what I want to do.
Well, hire me then. Here I am. It's great to see you.
All right.
Halfway across the world.
All right, I'm going to pay you in Jaffe coin. How about that? So
I love it.
So Kate O'Neill, author, tech humanist, founder of KO Insights. I already have 3 questions just associated with your banner. Guest number 248. But first of all, you were one of the first 100 employees at Netflix. And I heard you, I'm hearing this, the producers are whispering in my ear, that you were the person that said, move from DVDs to streaming. Can you confirm this rumor?
No, I did not do that. What I did do was, and this has made me unpopular in my career, unfortunately, I did the research for whether we should rent games at Netflix. And I said no, that would change our focus. And so Netflix had explored the idea of whether we should be renting games, and you can blame me for the fact that they don't. But, yeah.
Well,
but no,
Well,
yeah.
Hang on a second. If you had been that person, then you would have become, GameStop, and would have been part of the whole, Wall Street bets, and you would be a penny stock as opposed to the mighty Netflix.
That's right. That I can take credit for that, I guess.
So Tom Morris says we all love Kate already. And Steve Garfield says, put laptop up on books. I'm assuming is he referring to you, Kate? He can't be referring to me, because my laptop is on books right now. So,
is there just too much headspace? Is that what I'm hearing?
Know. Well, you can always adjust the power of the MacBook Pro. David Libby says, there you go. David Libby says, love it. And Tristan responds to the soliloquy by saying, we need to control your feed so you choose what you consume and who you connect with. And Manif says, love the new studio, also known as the dining room as well. But Tom says we both look great, and he's referring to you twice, so that's fine. All right. Kate O'Neill, guest number 248. My second question for you is KO Insights. It must stand for Kate O'Neill, like Jess 3 is Jesse. Am I right?
You would think so, but actually it stands for Jess 3. So that's a really weird coincidence.
Touche, touche. Nicely, well played.
Yeah, no, everybody, when I created that company name, people started asking me if the KO stood for knockout. And I was like, what? But it's Kate O'Neill, obviously. But I think it's hilarious that people's first impression is that it should be Knockout Insights, which I'll take as a compliment. Thank you very much.
It makes me think of, those jokes. I mean, growing up here in South Africa, it was like, Kate rules okay, and like someone rules okay, and then it would be like the Queen rules UK, and flowers rule bouquet, and then there was dyslexia rules KO, or Mike Tyson rules KO. So there were different versions of it. Look, I grew up in a different time,
Is this like South African rhyming slang or something, like Cockney rhyming slang? Is this the equivalent?
I mean, we did whatever we could to pass the time because we did not have Netflix. We had like 4 channels, and we literally would sometimes just stare in front of that test pattern and just watch the test pattern. And
Thank
of course,
goodness we have
hypnotized.
Joseph Jaffe now. I mean, that's what we can all watch these days.
Well, you know it, and it's interesting that you say that, because what I thought would be interesting to do is to talk about some things that are in the news. And we will get to that in just a moment. But first, what we have to do is we have to divulge some fun facts about Kate O'Neill. Did you know that Kate O'Neill once worked at Net? Oh, you did know that. Did you know that Kate O'Neill is a lover of cats? I don't want to say cat lady, but for a few years you had as many as 6 cats.
That's right.
There's a photo.
That's right.
How does one manage 6 cats? Is the answer very carefully.
Yeah, very carefully. But also, what's really interesting about having 6 cats at one time is that there's sort of a cat society that you can observe. And so you get to see these kind of sociological interactions and the rules of cat society in a way that you never would have with just 1 or 2 cats. Like, they achieve their own hierarchies. And it's not just kind of the obvious hierarchy, like there's an alpha cat. It's like people have privileges, right? Like, one cat has the privilege to be kind of hanging around the bathroom when I'm getting my hair done or whatever. And one cat has the privilege to be in the kitchen while I'm prepping food. But I didn't realize these were privileges until each cat had their own sort of territory. So I think that's pretty interesting. I think, it became an interesting sort of sociological experiment in cat psychology or cat society.
Well, I see a clear parallel here, because if you're saying there's a whole hierarchy, I'm thinking now of the world of Clubhouse, where you have this hierarchy of moderators. And interestingly enough, as you know, if you become a moderator, you get what's called the green bean, which is also known as the cat butt.
The cat butt, exactly.
So what can we learn from cats that will help us become better moderators on Clubhouse, Kate O'Neill?
That's really fun. I love that way to frame the question. And I think what cats do really well is they know how to use their charm to insinuate themselves to get what they want. Like, if people think of dogs as the ones who are super loving and affectionate, cats know how to ration that affection and enthusiasm so that they can get what they want in return. And I don't propose that we become more manipulative. I just propose that we be very clear about our intentions and use our efforts wisely.
Well, I mean, it's so interesting, because what I thought we would do tonight or today, at lunch, whatever, wherever you are in the world, is talk about, there were so many things in the news, and one of them relates actually to charm and charisma, a certain ex-president, allegedly, and another one relates to the idea of streaming and television. So if you would be so inclined, I thought it might be a nice idea to talk about things that are in the news. Would you like to do that?
Let's do it.
Okay, so here's the first interesting piece of news, and to me, very, very relevant for my life and for my life force, which is the show. Conan O'Brien is leaving his late night post, and he is essentially moving to streaming. And he's going to have a once a week show on HBO Max. Now, obviously for me, I just, perked up and I was like, I think if I needed a sign that I was on the right track, this has got to be that sign. But what do you think about the fact that he is leaving, TBS and his entire life or career, and he's pivoting and moving now into the kind of John Oliver type of once a week variety show model?
Well, there's a couple of things that I think of. One is, if history is any indication, then a major late night host stepping away from his post leaves a vacancy for a South African to step in. So, yeah.
Trevor Noah?
Yeah, exactly. So you're well situated here.
Wait, so Trevor Noah is going to TBS, which means I am going to the Daily Show.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, like in the past, we've seen at least one example where the departure of a late night host has left a void that only a South African could fill. So I think that leaves you well positioned. So consider that.
I like that. You are the oracle. You've seen the future. Now, by the way, Tom says if you could just get your hair a little higher in the middle, I can see you taking over for the man. And of course, color me orange.
Yeah. You could also do what I do and just wear sunglasses on top of your head. It automatically adds an inch or so of height. So you could do that instead.
I do like that look. But speaking of orange men, we just found out today, look at these segues, that Facebook's, whatever they call it, the board, what is it? The board, the advisory group, the oversight. There's this weird, what is that? Basically Mark Zuckerberg, a different split personality of his, but they have voted against Trump coming back. And I have to tell you that I'm a little surprised. I thought of all the platforms, Facebook would bring him back. What do you think about this? I mean, whether you want to get political or not political, I don't care. I just want to know what you have to think, what you have to say about this.
Well, it's interesting because within my sphere, within my sort of friend group and acquaintance group on Twitter and other social media, this is often a topic of sort of some ridicule that this Facebook oversight group is thought to be sort of theater. Like it's a bunch of academics and a bunch of advisors from various parts of industry who are meant to be providing, sort of ethical guidance or responsibility guidance to the company. But there's, in a sense, people feel like it's ethics washing instead of it having any teeth. And so what's happening here, I feel like, is actually moving in the right direction of advising that Facebook made the right decision in barring Trump from the platform once there was, misinformation widely being distributed and so on, and that it's right to keep him off the platform because there's reason to believe that would be propagated again in the future. So I think that's a pretty good thing to see this oversight board do, and it's nice to see that my more cynical colleagues are being shown at least some value to the group so far.
Are there any conditions or circumstances or scenarios where you think that decision could change or be reversed? For example, he says, I'm out of politics and not getting back in and not affiliating whatsoever. Because it's interesting. It's interesting because Facebook has become a villain, a real villain in terms of the role that they've played. Whereas, and look, again, whatever side of the fence you want to fall on, you might say that they, you might actually hold them up to a higher standard because of their pursuit of freedom of speech and expression. But it's interesting that an action or an act can be so irreversible and so permanent that even a Facebook would basically, kind of at least hold the line for just a wee bit longer.
Yeah, I think that Facebook has definitely felt their share of criticism in the last few years. I don't know how much that's really changing any of their strategic direction because they've clearly had a mantra of growth and of kind of influence at all costs, at any cost. And that's gotten them pretty far. So I don't think that that's changing. I don't think Mark Zuckerberg has a mindset toward change in that regard. But it is, I just think it's very encouraging that this oversight board has led to this kind of reinforcement of this decision. And for me, yeah, Trump coming back onto the platform, if he eschews politics or something like that, I still don't know how healthy that is for the ecosystem, because he's clearly demonstrated that he has no commitment to any kind of rational or objective truth. So there needs to be some separate guidelines that become developed for the type of character that he or Alex Jones or any of these kind of people that are committed to like scandal and perpetrating just kind of like numbers, like they're just interested in the raw outrage and an audience attraction that they are generating. I think that those types of people who have had that kind of influence need to be monitored in a different way. And I don't know what that looks like. It's not my expertise, but I'm very happy to see that people who have that expertise are weighing in on that.
We all need to evolve. We all need to adapt. I mean, that is really the essence of survival of the fittest. And even going back to what Tristan was saying, it's being able to take control of our own feed, be able to interpret our own feed, and also know when we're being manipulated or not. So right. I do love that conversation. But I was going to say, speaking of clowns, Tom Morris says, did I tell you that Conan is the only man I've ever danced with? It was to warm up his live show audience, and he's a crazy dancer. I'm really just not sure how to answer that question. So we won't, but we'll get to our third news item, which I thought was interesting. Peloton is recalling all of its treadmills with reports of injuries and a death. There are two parts to this that interest me, Kate. Number one is the fact that Peloton has become very Apple-esque. They've become really arrogant. They really double down and dig in. And so when a brand does that and then they have to capitulate like this, they really end up with egg on their face, number one. And I just thought that was really, interesting in a sense. So what do you think about the fact that they've, had to not only capitulate, and then the other part of that I just have to add is this is a really difficult, challenging time for delivery and pickup.
Right.
And I can just imagine how long it's going to take them to now have to get feet in the door in this, challenging time to recall all of these. I mean, this is a huge blemish on their brand track record.
Well, it's interesting because I just finished reading Phil Knight's autobiography, Shoe Dog, which I don't, if any of you haven't read it, if Joseph, if you hadn't read it or your audience hasn't read it, and you're interested in business leadership and entrepreneurship and so on, I highly recommend it. I haven't been a Nike fan, like a super fan, but it was still a very interesting story to read about, the evolution of it. And there's a story that's very relevant where they introduced I believe it was a basketball court shoe, and they thought that they were introducing some great innovation where there was like a high sidewall on the shoe and so on. But what had turned out to happen was that because of that high sidewall, it created situations where if you landed just wrong on your foot, you would like trip and you might, tear your ankle or sprain your ankle or something like that. It was leading to more injuries. So they took the L and they just recalled all the shoes, and they were really, really worried that there were going to be a lot of follow-up lawsuits, a lot of bad press. And what happened in that case, he said, was very surprising, that they actually ended up doing pretty well with the public perception, because there was this sense that like, hey, we liked that Nike was willing to innovate and experiment. And we also liked that they saw the value in being ahead of the public health concern and getting the shoe back. And so I think there's a possibility that Peloton will have that kind of reaction from the public. It's obvious to me in retrospect that there's a big difference between looking at a screen that's engaging while you're on a stationary bicycle versus looking at a screen that's engaging while you're on a treadmill. And it's clear that there could be a huge safety concern there, and obviously there is. So I'm glad that they're being proactive about it, and I feel like there's a possibility that people will see it that way too.
It is also, what they call the tyranny of line extension, and diversification. And it really does feed the narrative and the thesis behind Built to Suck, which is that companies feel this pressure to have to keep growing growing for growth's sake, for shareholder sake. And what eventually happens is they start to commit mistakes or errors because they get a little bit removed from what their core mission was. I can promise you, if Peloton had to recall their bike, I would just say, no, you can't take it. I don't care. I don't care if people's legs are like snapping off. Nobody takes my MTV and nobody takes my Peloton. So the love that I have for this, it's weird. The love that I have for this bike is almost, there's an opposite but equal disdain or hatred for a product that they have that they struggle to recall. It's just very interesting when you think about, like I ran a room in Clubhouse a week ago talking about the Clubhouse brand case study, but the Peloton case study for me is as fascinating, especially when we think about what will be taught, in MBA classes, for years and decades to come.
Yeah, it kind of ties into me I've been rereading a lot of Peter Drucker, and one of the ideas that stuck out to me just recently was he talked about the abandonment principle, and that there were times in a product lifecycle or in a company's lifecycle where they just needed to abandon a line or abandon a product, and there were a few reasons why that might be the case. One of them, which was really interesting and compelling, was if you saw that there were still just a few good years left in it, then it's time to abandon it. And his philosophy was, then you're milking the life out of something that's actually distracting you from whatever your attention should be on next. So I feel like that's not exactly relevant to the Peloton situation, although there's kind of a tie in there where I feel like they needed to stay focused. They need to stay focused on that core business around the stationary bikes, and they need to figure out what it is that's a natural evolution from that, what keeps them moving in a forward-thinking direction. And it either isn't treadmills, or they need to rethink the safety of the treadmill and how it's designed. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next with this.
Yeah, I mean, I love the learning from the abandon principle, because it does come back to arrogance and hubris and sometimes just the ability to say, when someone calls your baby ugly, it might be because your baby's ugly.
Right.
But it's weird. It's weird to detach and divorce and separate ourselves, from something that we're so vested in, either, spiritually, emotionally, or financially.
Yeah.
So I want to segue into, another part of, I could have literally written this entire show based on just the title of your name. You call yourself a tech humanist. And that's why I was inspired, that and everything about you to write this soliloquy about the how do they work together? Do they cancel each other out? So what or who is a tech humanist? And I'd love for you to set up, the fact that this is, clearly your wheelhouse and your life force.
Yeah, so I spent 25 years now or so working in technology, and one of the things that had occurred to me in the last, better part of the last decade was that one of the roles I always have in technology is advocating for the person, the customer, the user, the whatever role that person happens to be in relative to the company. Ooh, look at that! We've got some tiling of the book title there, of the cover.
We got lots of stuff for you. I mean,
I mean, nothing's gonna beat that cat picture. That was pretty much the best thing ever. But anyway, so having this perspective on always focusing on the human in the context of these technological interactions. Like I am an experienced strategist, primarily in my line of work. Historically, I'm helping companies figure out how to dimensionalize what their brand strategy is into the interactions and transactions that they create with people, and how to make those memorable and meaningful and so on. So that's a lot of the work that I've done. But then over the last, like I say, better part of the decade, it started to coalesce into this higher order kind of philosophy for me. And there was this relationship between business and humanity, and the way business is the sort of the creator of and the manufacturer of a lot of the technology-based experiences that people consume. it's through business that technology comes to mass market. Through most of the tech experiences that we are surrounded with every day are business driven. So it's funny because what Tech Humanist is really about isn't just about that relationship between technology and humanity. It's about the relationship between business and humanity, and how technology is sort of the catalyst between in that relationship, or how it amplifies what it amplifies about that relationship. And so it's a call to action for business to look for the best alignment between what the business is trying to achieve and what the humans on the other side of that experience are trying to achieve, and then use technology to amplify the best of that. So that's the premise and the idea, and a lot has come from that around talking to businesses all over the world, talking to the UN, talking to the city of Amsterdam and other cities. It's been a really great run the last few years, helping companies and organizations and cities think about how technology can actually bring to life the best and most meaningful things that they're actually trying to do with people in that constituency.
I mean, I can give you a perfect example of that, which is, I had Jeff Kirshner on the show, and he is the founder and the CEO of a company called Literati. And what started out as a mission to basically eliminate pollution in the world, they now describe themselves as a data company, but cities, municipalities, districts are hiring them to try and figure out through big data how to, again, the mission is eradicate pollution and garbage, but also solve other issues as well. Like, for example, they were hired to ultimately levy and quantify or justify a tax on cigarettes based on how many cigarette butts were found in San Francisco. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating. I think there's a lot of this kind of thing. I spoke a couple of years ago with a department at Yale that's around forestry and environmental services. And a lot of those students are super inspiring. They're in the graduate program there, and they're doing these great projects that are very similar to what you're describing, where they're using big data to quantify attributes of human life and the experience on this planet, to try to figure out how can systems be built around that actually either clean up resources or make things more available that will help clean up resources, or and that sort of thing. It's really inspiring what kind of thought is going into that direction these days.
I want to ask you some really big heady questions, which is, right. So you can also pass on some of these questions and say, we'll come back to that at the end. So number one, you talk about technology amplifying these efforts. I would assume that amplification can be both good and bad. And if so, I wonder if there is an example that you can give of maybe both, or just double down on the good. If in fact that's the answer.
What you've asked is kind of a great segue into my next book, and I'm kind of going to resist it because I assume that you've got a place for us to go that direction. But what I find is that what we tend to spend strategically, we tend to spend a lot of time on what can go wrong. And trying to mitigate the risks and trying to plan for, how not to have things fail. And that's important, but we don't spend a lot of time on what could go right. And we don't spend a lot of time sort of idealizing and thinking about how could we create the best possible futures? How could we create the best possible experiences for the most possible people? And when we do that work, when we actually spend the time thinking about, what's the best scenario here, then we actually could create rigorous and disciplined structures that reinforce that, as opposed to reinforcing, just the bad. So there are situations where I think, most of business is oriented toward, of course, a very profit-centric mindset, but also this very growth-oriented mindset. It's what we were talking about with Facebook and some other examples. And I think that growth mindset, that, sort of growth at all costs, is a very harmful, dangerous one. I mean, growth is associated with cancer, among other attributes. So it isn't an inherent good. I think we need to be thinking about alignment as an inherent good, and trying to figure out, what the company exists to do, what an organization or company is trying to do at its best, and then what people that they're encountering are trying to do in their lives, in the context you encounter them. And then what amplification is supposed to be about, or acceleration of that alignment, is to say, all right, look, in the best possible scenario, when someone meets this company or this organization or city, they're meeting them because they want to achieve this thing. They want to solve this problem. They want to have this experience. They want to, whatever the thing is. And so let's make sure that we offer something that does the best possible version of that. And then how can we measure and maximize what's happening in that regard? So maximizing that as opposed to growth is a much healthier way for organizations to be oriented. I think that leads to all kinds of holistically better measurements in general anyway.
I mean, listen, I love that response for so many reasons. One is that, again, it aligns really strongly with the premise of Built to Suck, right? Scale, size, economies of scale. But one of the things I do talk about is I talk about the prime directive is a return to growth. But I'm very clear about the fact that growth is not always about growing out. Mm-hmm. It's also sometimes about growing up.
Yeah,
maturity. And maybe growing up also comes back to the abandon principle that growth, like I am growing through this conversation with you because I am learning, because I am changing my point of view, because, and I think that's where companies maybe, let's say the parochial, the hierarchical, the inflexible company was able to grow in terms of top and bottom line, but not grow in terms of alignment, to your point.
Right. And also, I think, maturity seems like it's aligned with what you're talking about there. One of the concepts I used to use a lot when I was doing work around digital strategy and analytics is sophistication. I think sophistication is a concept that's very useful for organizations to think about strategically. Like, how do we not only become better at what we do? How do we become more sophisticated at what we do? How do we know more about this industry? How do we understand more what people are looking for? How do we offer a more elite or delightful or whatever kind of product or service? I mean, all of those things are what I would think of as sophistication. And that's where I think a lot of companies are missing the boat by focusing so much on like efficiency or growth or profit or whatever, and not orienting their thinking and their modeling towards sophistication.
I would love to hear that word spoken much more and by more people, the idea of sophistication, because, you could look at it elitist, but you could also look at it in terms of becoming not just more mature, but more experienced, more tenured, more discerning, and more classy, quite frankly. As opposed to,
and here's the thing, for me, it relates to meaning. Everything relates to meaning. This is like the key to understanding my entire career trajectory, is that I'm a linguist by education. I have been fascinated with language my whole life. And meaning is the core of what fascinates me about language. And it's the core of what fascinates me about technology and communication and human-to-human relationships and all that too. So one way to think about sophistication is that it's about relevance, and relevance is a form of meaning. Purpose is a form of meaning. The purpose that companies understand about why they're in business and so on, that is the shape that meaning takes in business. So there's all these ways that I think the human-centric way to think about any of these topics is to bring it to meaning, some dimension of meaning. And meaning is always about what matters. And there we come back again to that's why I think the alignment principle is so strong, because it teaches you about what matters in the relationship between the company or organization or city and the human that's interacting with it. What matters in that relationship, amplify that, and then you're going to be much better off for it.
I'm going to just put up the quote. This is the quote that I did choose for today's episode. If it keeps up, man will atrophy all his limbs but the push button finger. And hopefully that push button finger does not involve any codes or a suitcase. What do they call it? The special suitcase. The what's the name for it?
I don't know what you mean.
I'm talking about the nuclear codes. They call it the briefcase or the suitcase, or there is I don't know what it is. The football. There you go. Moving the chains. That was said by Frank Lloyd Wright, architect, as opposed to Albert Einstein, scientist. Before I ask you the other question, and then I want to make sure that we touch on this idea of the economy as people and the new book. Yes, the football. Thank you for that. David Libby responded to no doubt you, because I'm just babbling because it's Cinco de Mayo. But he says mind blown.
Right.
No. It was there before. Mind blown, and I'm glad, because that's what we try and do. We try and blow your mind on the show. I just wanted to ask you, going back to this idea of heady question number 2, is capitalism and humanity, or capitalism and humanity, are they incongruous? At the end of the day, when you talk about the relationship between business and humanity amplified through technology.
Yeah, no, I have been asked. It's really funny. I was on a podcast interview a while ago with an agency podcast, and the interviewer asked me, I'm hearing strains of communism or socialism in what you're saying. Like, are you a communist? Are you anti-capitalist? And I'm not. I'm super excited about the opportunities of capitalism. I think capitalism is a brilliant system for entrepreneurship, for allowing people to innovate, to create opportunities for themselves, to employ others, to grow in really cool, interesting ways. But I am incredibly bullish on making sure that there are social support structures in place. And I think that one of the I'm also bullish on government regulations that make sure that humans are safe in the process, and that we can't have unrestrained capitalism. We can't have people who are just exploiting opportunities that are harmful to humans and making lots and lots of money for it. I think that there's got to be balance in that equation. So I'm both and. I'm for capitalism. I'm also for, if you want to call it socialism, I'm fine with that. But I want there to be a social safety net in place that makes sure that people are okay, and that there's government regulations that can protect the people that are affected by the offerings and the companies that grow large and have a lot of power in that equation.
And look, to your point, technology can amplify and can amplify the good, right? The good, the great, turn good into great as well. But so can business amplify and solve and save. And hang on, we have breaking news just coming in right now. Kate is not a communist.
Not a communist.
We can confirm that you are not a communist. So, wow.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really important that what you just said too. I think that's the key point about technology. That business can solve a lot of these problems with technology. I think that's probably the only way we're going to get a lot of problems that we currently face solved, is through business aligning its core purpose, what it actually exists to do, with some social good. And there's examples of this that are just all over the place. But the one example I love that's most practical is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and those 17 goals that have been identified for how we improve life on the planet for all humans and all living things. Really, it has to do with things like improving education, or decreasing inequality, or gender equality, or whatever. And there's so many of these kinds of examples, but there's 17 of them. So there's bound to be one that's pretty close to aligning with almost any company's mission or purpose. And so I think what's happening a lot, I'm really encouraged by, is that companies are sort of selecting the one that most aligns with what they do in their business, and trying to make sure that they not only measure the kind of core metrics of their business, but that they see how they're doing and contributing to, moving this sustainable development goal along.
Moving the chains of the football, the other football. But as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, for all these companies searching for their purpose and wondering what their purpose is, all they need to do is go and look at this, little checklist of 17 items and go, wait a second, we can do that. Actually, we're already doing that. We didn't realize it. What if we use technology to amplify that? In fact, Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and buy Kate's new book. How's that for a segue? Tell us about the new book.
The new book is called A Future So Bright. And the premise is to think about the future in a way that is less about this binary of dystopia versus utopia, which is pretty much the only way we've ever been sort of taught to think about the future. And of course, everyone knows how ridiculous the idea of utopia is, so that's right out of the question. So most of the time when we think and talk about the future with other people, we're talking about sort of shades of dystopia. And so I want to get us away from that unnecessary binary and that unnecessary negativity and move us toward a place of more agency and more of a sense of empowerment that we actually control the future through the actions we take and the decisions we make today and in the next, time to come. I think that we need to understand that in a very active way. We're faced with, with a lot of pretty existential threats. I mean, we faced this in 2020. We faced a pandemic. We've been thinking a lot about AI and the future of work, the future of jobs, and the future of the workplace. Now that we're returning to offices, we're thinking about climate change. Of course, we're thinking about social justice. There's just so many dimensions on which we are thinking in a really big way. And I think we need to start recognizing how, first of all, many of those topics are interconnected. And we need to think about the ways in which business can be part of this discussion in a very productive and healthy way and be advancing the right kinds of issues that move us toward very optimistic outcomes. We need to think about how everyone in this world is connected to the outcomes that we put in place. So I'm trying to lay out a very strategically optimistic view of the future and a roadmap for how we get to it.
Well, my mind is blown like David Libby's because I just realized a future so bright, I got to wear shades. I just realized, like Jesse and Jess 3 and KO and OK, that's why you're always wearing shades, because the future is so bright.
That's right. That's exactly why. Yes. It started a long time ago. I just started doing this. It was because the future is so bright. That's right.
Well, now, and if it wasn't, it is now. You're welcome.
That's right. It's going to be now.
But Tom, by the way, says you are a natural philosopher as well.
Oh.
So, there you go. But it's funny. I went for coffee today, a socially distanced coffee, and I was happened to, it's so crazy. I mean, two little weird connections. John Sane, who's a previous guest on the show, I would describe him as a futurist. He walks into the coffee shop today, and I recognize him based on his glasses. That's all. He's got these real retro 60s or 70s glasses, and I just knew it was him based on nothing else. Haven't seen the guy in a year and a half, etc. Anyway, that just a glasses thing, but he actually
have people come up to me at conferences and say, "You must be Kate O'Neill. I recognize the fact that you have sunglasses on your head and a big smile on your face." Like that, those two things will make you stand out in any environment. But that's very cool that you saw him based on his glasses.
And so I introduced someone to him, and I said, he's a futurist. And he says, "I'm not describing myself as a futurist anymore." And I forget the exact words he used, but he said, "I call myself a futurisist. Like I work in futures." And he said, and I'll tell you why. He said, when you look at the events of the last year plus, some people made an unbelievable amount of money, and other people lost everything and earned nothing. He said, same events, same world, but different futures. And so what he's recognizing, I think to your point, that it isn't extremes. It isn't dystopia, utopia. It isn't black or white, but rather multiple scenarios, or certainly the grays, the 256 shades of gray. So I just wanted to mention that. Funnily enough, this literally happened to me several hours ago, and I think it really reinforces that, how you've taken this position that says, let's stop exaggerating, generalizing, stereotyping, and kind of recognize that it is the end, it is the interconnectedness, it is the middle.
Yeah, it's the interconnectedness. I'm a very both and thinker. And I think that, when you were talking about in your squish soliloquy, you talked about technology and humanity? Is it and? Is it or? My philosophy is always going to be both and. I think we're in a place where, you talked about too, the idea of, are we as humans going to be overcome with greed and screw it up, or are we going to do the other thing? And that's a both and too. Of course, we're going to do both of those things. We're going to screw it up and we're going to get some things right. And some people are going to flourish and some people are going to not flourish. But I think, the more we can recognize the holistic complexity of that picture and work toward making sure that there are fewer unintended consequences and that we have more of what we're actually trying to build in place, the more we're thinking about idealistic outcomes and really working toward achieving those, the better off we're going to be.
So in the time we have left, one of the things that I even titled this episode, talk about link baiting, but not intentionally. It's just because I knew we would just have an amazing conversation and go in all these different directions. But one of the things was this idea of the economy is people. And I'm thinking to myself, this has become your mantra. Are we actually talking about this marriage, right? This idea of not just technology and humanity, but business and humanity, and therefore amplified by technology. Is that what you mean by the economy is people?
Yeah, it's partly that. I think I've become a real student of economics and the economy in the last few years, and I'm just fascinated by how economics describes everything in this very kind of complex ecosystem. But what I find is that there are often discussions about the economy in this very sort of isolated way, like we're talking about the stock market or we're talking about the movements of money across the world. And that's not what the economy refers to. When we really think about the economy, what we're talking about is the wellness and the well-being of people, the ability of people to make money, to be functionally employed or be able to be supported by some system, to be able to be productive and okay, and contribute to an ecosystem in which they are somehow prosperous or somehow, equal with other people and having some kind of exchange. And when we think of it that way, I think it gives us a lot more opportunity to dimensionalize conversations about infrastructure and to dimensionalize conversations about relief funds or things like that. Those kinds of conversations, or things like what does it mean to put pause on certain businesses because we're worried about virus transmission or something. What does it mean to do that from an economic standpoint? Well, it means some things for the people who own the businesses that are being put on pause, but it also means some things to the people who are now not going to be infected because there isn't that transmission happening. So I think we have to have this very holistic, integrative kind of view of human health and well-being when we talk about what the economy really is. And that's become a really key piece to my work with this book as well, is basically everything is people, when you carry down to it. And it sounds so trite and simple, but I think you have to think dimensionally about what that actually means for each one of those issues or each one of those areas. And it starts to give you clues about how to take a human-centric approach to making decisions or making policy around those areas.
And I think at the end of the day, if we had to put a bow on this conversation, it's technology actually having a context and a purpose, fitting in and having a role. And that role is to amplify the ability for business, to celebrate, elevate, compensate, and advocate on behalf of humanity. That's my little mantra for the create economy, by the way: celebrate, elevate, compensate, advocate. But also what you've done as well, I think, is frame everything in terms of the fact that, yes, we need to return and embrace the essentials of what economics is about. Understand the dynamics, the relationships, the interactivity between, but not at the expense of the human beings. And for me, it does come down to this idea of, always think about the human being as opposed to the data point, as opposed to the rounding error, as opposed to, acceptable levels of churn and attrition. And sometimes it can just come down to one face that has a pair of sunglasses on the head and a big beaming smile, and that face is Kate O'Neill.
That's me.
that is you, Kate O'Neill. Now listen. You need to connect to Kate, because how on earth are you going to know when A Future So Bright is out? I'll tell you how. You connect with her on Clubhouse. You connect with her through her website, KO Insights. You connect with her on Instagram, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, because she is a natural philosopher. She's also known as an unflappable virtual presenter. She is known as a tech humanist. She's known as a cat lady. She loves cats. You know, she actually understands more about moderators on Clubhouse because of this as well. But ultimately, Kate, you are, even though you did not drink with me, because it is 12 noon, and if you did, people would be worried about you. You did. And we don't even know what's in that interesting brown cocktail as well.
We have no way to know.
We have no way to know. I just want to say that this has been great. You've been an amazing sport. I've loved reconnecting with you during this time and hanging out with you on Clubhouse. In fact, so much so that when you disappeared for a while, I said, is everything okay? Because, we used to have our little social rooms at 9 o'clock at night. We were just hanging out.
Yeah. That was fun.
Talking about my 600-pound life and other things. Remember that?
Yes. Life got busy. That's been very interesting to wonder, like, what's going to happen with Clubhouse when life gets busy. And I think it's a very interesting ponder. Hey, you got Adam Pierno, one of my favorite people.
He was on Monday, DC Crenshaw yesterday. Tomorrow is Andy Henriquez. I am live on location in South Africa, but I have to say, no matter where I am in the world, there's no place that I'd rather be with you guys and the show. Kate, it's been an absolute pleasure, and you know what Chuck Norris has to say about you.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
There you go. I'll be back tomorrow. Wow. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing with your host, multiple author, and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show, and if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.